welcome to the unlicensed therapist, Mandie or Manders. I know you as Mandie. I know you like to put Manders in there. You were on my other show, MJ's Progress, Not Perfection, already. So,
Yeah.
but it's been a minute. I went through a relapse since then. My brain kind of went foggy for a while because of Xanax. So we're gonna go through your story for this episode. Pretend like I know nothing. I know a lot. I definitely remember a lot because you've had quite the upbringing, and
Yeah.
that's why I knew you'd be perfect for this show. Um,
Mhm.
so let's start off with where are you from, Mandie?
Well, I am originally from Western Pennsylvania in a little town called Normalville in Stallstown area. It's about 45 miles outside of Pittsburgh,
Okay.
and it's very much in the mountains, very tight knit community where basically you're supposed to keep your secrets. You're not supposed to share your stories and your trauma.
Yeah, I
So,
mean that's a popular theme in a lot of small towns.
yes, definitely. It's the secrets that destroy the families.
Yeah,
Because instead of facing the trauma and dealing with it head on, a lot of people want to sit there and push it under the rug, and that's not beneficial for anybody.
and they say our secrets keep us sick.
Exactly. Our secrets are only as strong as we allow them to be.
Yep.
And a lot of times, whenever I look back on everything that I went through, in my life, I've never held blame or, harbored any resentment towards the people that did the things that they did to traumatize me. I constantly tried to find the lesson that I learned as the outcome of it.
Yeah,
It's
which is a good
basically
way to look at it because I don't want to be crass, but what's done is done. you you
exactly.
you
You got to
can't
move
go
on.
back and change what's happened, but you can try to, you have to try to live with it, and because it's not going to make it go away what happened, and the more you can accept what's happened for it, what it is, you can kind of live a more peaceful life today. um Parents, together, did they divorce? How did that look growing up?
Well, basically, my story is a little bit different. I was born to basically a child. My mom was 14 when she had me, and she was in the seventh grade. And um, from what I understand, and from the story, there was some situations that occurred where my mother was raped when she was young. And as a result of that, there was a lot of resentment because, like I said, our family, we don't talk about the things that went on because of the fact that 90% of the things that went on were inside the family. So people didn't want to stare and draw attention to it because of the fact that it made us look bad. But in reality, everybody knew about it, but it was just in the gossip and it was in the background, and nobody wanted to stare and take action upon it. So basically, my mom was with her sister, and her sister was dating my father's cousin at the time. And my mother and my real father ended up getting together. It was pretty much a 1 day stand, I guess, and she ended up getting pregnant as a result. Now, growing up, a lot of my trauma was based on my identity, and that's where my dissociated identity disorder comes into play because at the age of 2 was the first time that I was sexually assaulted. And that was by 5 18-year-olds. Whenever I say that I was completely assaulted, people say that you can't remember the things that went on. And that if you have vivid memories of them, then you're lying to people. You're just sitting there making it up and you're drawing a conclusion on what it went down. As a person that has 30 different personalities and alters, you cannot tell me what my mind can stare and comprehend and what I can stare and manifest. And that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand about this associated identity disorder. We are very unapproachable. I get really standoffish when people sit there and they try to talk to me because I've always felt like I was supposed to be in the background. And then whenever I started noticing that, people starting to bully other people, I kind of took on the role of a protector, and I got through the situations that I got through by telling myself that I was a superhero, that I was different from everybody else on the world because of the fact that I had to endure these things to overcome them. The
Yeah.
first time that I tried to, unalive myself, I was 8 years old. And whenever people say, you were calling out for attention, no, I literally was intent on ending my life. I literally took and tied a noose around my neck and jumped off the banister. And I don't know whether the rope broke or something, or if it's just my mind sitting there and letting me know that I ended up still living through the situation. I began believing in angels at a very early age because there was no explanation how I didn't end up hurting myself and how I ended up back in my bed. And it was almost like I heard a being, and I think that it was my great grandfather who had passed away, telling me that he knew that my road was going to be hard, but there was a bigger purpose for me in life. And then basically, you know, throughout all this time, my mom was with my stepdad, and my stepfather raised me like I was his own child.
Well, let me ask. Your mom was 14 when she had
Mhm.
you, which means she was pregnant at like 13, which is like you
Yeah.
said is like seventh grade. Um,
hmm
how old was your father, like your biological father?
He was 21 at the time, and
Oh, wow.
he was,
Okay.
yeah, and he was ending up going to the military. And there's situations along with that. My dad ended up, having a girlfriend, and I have a younger stepsister that's literally 11 months and some days younger than me.
Okay.
And that made it very difficult because, the whole time that I was around my stepdad, he would always beat my mom. There was a lot of domestic violence and stuff. And he would drink a lot. And as a result, I've always been the protector, like I said. And I thought that the reason why they fought was because of the fact that I was abused. And I thought that they blamed me for all of their problems, when in reality, I didn't understand my mom had her own issues. My stepdad had his own issues. And I was just completely an innocent bystander that got sucked into the mix.
Now let me rewind a second. Who were these 18-year-olds?
I was at one of my mom's friends' houses, and it was her son and four of his friends. They were in a band, and supposedly, they told me just to go upstairs, and see what the kids were doing, to listen to the music. And apparently, that's when all this happened. And I don't like really, know about how it lasted and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. I don't
I
need
just
those
know,
details. I was just
yeah,
curious.
yeah,
And
no.
but
I say
how
that
old are you,
because
Mandy?
how old am I now? I am
Yeah.
45. I'm about to be 46 in March.
Okay, so what year was this? Back in the late 70s?
No, this was 84, 83, 84.
84. Okay. It was 84 and a half. Okay.
Yeah. And basically, like I said, I felt like I was trouble from the
Yeah.
very beginning. I always felt like my existence was an accident, that I was thrown out there with a defective button.
And to your mom's, she was at that time 16 years old. You
Yeah,
know,
basically,
there
she
was
had
no
no clue.
parenting books in 1984, like especially for a 16-year-old. There wasn't Teen Mom on MTV in
Nope,
80,
none of that.
all those shows and shit. Like she was just trying to like survive, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Um,
and not to mention, you're from Pennsylvania as well. So
I'm from
from the
Jersey. I
area.
live in Pennsylvania now. I'm
But
very proud of being from Jersey.
sorry, didn't mean to offend you, Jersey
No, I'm
man.
kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm
But
kidding.
where I'm from in Westmoreland County,
Yeah.
literally, we were very technologically behind There was nothing in our town. We don't even have a gas station anymore. And that got taken away like 1988. Okay. And the only thing that we're basically known for is the ski resorts, Hidden Valley and Seven
Okay.
Springs. And it's like, with living in that type of environment, you already know the education.
Yeah.
I literally was brought up to believe that basically we're all white, and like Spanish and like the other languages, they didn't exist. This was just something that people used to piss people off, like literally. And that was like the type of mentality that they was bringing us up to see. So unfortunately, but luckily, okay, and I say unfortunately, but luckily, because of the fact that I believe that if I would have stayed in the situation that I was in with my mother, I wouldn't be here right now telling people how they can overcome their trauma and how they can stare and not be ashamed to share their story.
So
Because
you
this,
eventually got into the care of somebody else besides your mom.
yes, basically, I went to stay with my biological father, who was stationed in Alaska. And this will explain to you because
How
basically,
old were you at
my
this time?
mom,
Because at 8, you tried to unaliven yourself.
yeah, at 8, I was trying to unalive myself, and my mom and my stepdad had already, split up at this point. So I'm just basically going to go in a chronological order that way I don't
Yeah,
start and
do it.
mess everything. But basically, my mom and my stepdad split up, and my mom went wild. You know, she was a teenage mom that had no family support, no nothing like that, and the situation at home was hostile to begin with. So I was going to school. I'm living in cars, watching my mom sit there and be very promiscuous, trying to get us a place to stay for the night, sleeping with different men. And because of the fact that I was molested and abused as a child, I would scream. Like every time that I'd hear my mom and her boyfriend or the gentleman that she was with, the caller at the time, I would really scream and throw a tantrum because for me, that was something that was not right. It hurts, you know what I mean? So I thought that automatically that these people were hurting my mother.
Yeah.
And instead of me getting corrected about that, my mother beat the shit out of me. And literally, that was a lot of the problems. My mom would stare and go with these guys. And I always told my mom, I believe in you more than you believe in yourself. I think that you and me can do anything together. And you always have me. And my mother literally chose a man over me. I told her that I couldn't sit around and watch her be beaten around and not having anybody around me that I know that would be able to take care of me. So I told her that I threatened to go live with my real dad in Alaska because he had just gotten out of the army or just gotten stationed up there, but just gotten out of the Operation Desert Storm Desert Shield War. This is how crazy this was. At the age of 11, my mom had beat me so bad because of the fact that her boyfriend had basically threatened me that if I didn't perform oral on him, that he was going to stare and he was going to rape and molest my brother and sister. So basically, I did this and I told my uncle and I made a phone call to my stepdad and told him that he needed to come and get my brother and sister because this guy actually, my brother pulled a squirt gun out on him and the guy actually pulled out a regular gun and held it to my brother's head and said that if you ever start even playing, put a gun in my face again, I will kill you. At that point, I knew that it was too dangerous for my brother and sister to be there. And I knew that I had nowhere to go. So basically, um, I met my father that Christmas, and I met my stepmom and my stepsister. Basically, I was completely lost. I had so many thoughts running through my mind the whole time whenever I met them. Like, why didn't you want me? Why wasn't I good enough for you? Why didn't you save me? Because all the time, whenever I went through everything that I went through, the only thing that got me through was the thing that I was involved in a soap opera. That one day, that this was all gonna be just a terrible mistake, and I was gonna get somewhere in life. Um, Basically, whenever I went to stay with him, I told my mom that I no longer wanted to, be with her if she was gonna let people beat on her. And I told her it was me or him. And she told me not to let the door hit me on the ass on the way out. So I made a decision to stand tall because it was like, I can't make empty threats because I need her to know that this is a serious situation and I'm
Yeah,
scared for her.
yeah,
So, I made the mistake of closing that door. And I didn't realize that with me sitting there and making that leap, that it would cause my mom to not want me ever again. But my mom then, started pushing me off on other people. And when I was going through the things that I was going through, I never felt like I had a home. And when you talk about trauma and how it affects you in adulthood, the things that I go through now on a daily basis with my social anxiety, with having to control my alters, with having to deal with bullying and all the different things that I deal with on a consistent basis, and literally sharing my story to make other people realize that you don't have to be you don't have to be a statistic. We all make mistakes in life, and I know I've made my fair share.
yeah.
And a lot of people stand like they look at me because of the fact that I make jokes about my past with my sex trafficking situation. Okay, um, people are like, "How can you stare and just talk about that and just be so nonchalant about it?" Well, basically, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Am I supposed to sit there and look at you and say, I'm sorry, when you talk to me about certain things, I was pretty much groomed to be a wife at the age of 13.
Yeah, we didn't even get into this sex trafficking yet, did we? We're
No,
about
we
to.
didn't.
We're about to
We're
get into
about
it.
to. Yeah, we're
Okay.
about to get into it. Because basically, I went up to Alaska and stayed with my dad. But be, like within the time period after leaving my mom, I ended up bouncing back and forth to my step grandparents' house, which they were a big portion of my life that helped me out a lot.
Hmm.
But basically, I went to stay with my real dad in Alaska, and they had already knew that there was issues with my PTSD and all that, and I had to start seeing a psychologist every morning at 6 o'clock in the morning.
That's a lot.
And, yeah, and
That's a lot.
really, a lot of the kids would start and look at me and wonder how I was so troubled. And by the time that I was 11, instead of being a normal child, I was reading books about the Green River Killer. I was very advanced. I wrote books, I wrote stories, poetry, and I was always very a social butterfly, but it was because of the fact that I was bullied so bad. Like, I used to have to run after people to stare and say that I was playing a game because of how mean and cruel they were to me. And whenever somebody sits there and, like, starts judging you, like, these kids had no clue that I was getting the shit kicked out of me at home. I wasn't doing my homework because I had no time to do my homework. I was too busy sitting there worrying about who was going to beat me, who was going to rape me, where I was going to be next, what I was going to do. These aren't things that a child should have to ever experience. And then after I went to my dad decided that it was in my best interest to cut all communication off with my mother's family. And I would go to school and I would sneak call my grandma, collect from Alaska to ask her how my mom was doing. I found out one day that my mother was involved in a very serious accident and she had almost died. And I had thought, my mom needs me. I'm the only one that she has. I need to go home and be there for her. So I went and told my dad that I needed him to send me home because my mom was really sick and she needed me. And I thought that my mom would, welcome me. Well, I flew in and I got to Pittsburgh Airport and I waited for 2.5 hours for somebody to get a hold of my family members, for somebody to come down to Pittsburgh and pick me up from the airport. So basically, I'm standing there in the middle of an airport as a child, not knowing anybody, not knowing anything.
You were 13?
I was, no, I wasn't even 13 yet. I was still 12. I was 12 and a half, and I ended up being in Pennsylvania for about 2 weeks. My grandfather's sister's husband's brother, I have, I put it that way because of the fact that I don't even want to start and think about what these people are to me.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yep.
Yeah. So basically, he had his brother had told my aunt, my grandfather's sister, that they would take me in because my mom, didn't no longer need me, and they were going to raise me as their own because they couldn't have children of their own. This is where the nightmare begins. I go down to Florida and I get raped by a fire chief. And because of the fact that with all of my past, with my rape and everything, I wasn't believed. And the lady that was supposed to be my guardian told me the first time it hurts, but after that, it feels good. So basically, here I am, wondering what is going on in my life and whether or not I'm going to understand the vision of what my family is supposed to do, where am I supposed to go, and all that. So I literally, um, watched him beat the hell out of her. And I didn't know at the time, but she ended up telling me her story. She was also a drug addict that was an ex prostitute, and he found her and then he basically took her in. And it basically was a bad DV situation. And this guy had no regards for the law. They felt like they were invincible. It was one of those outlaw families. They thought that they were Jesse James.
Did you say
And
DV, domestic violence?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, basically, he beat the hell out of her and she left. The woman of the household left. So guess who had to step up to the role?
And you were
Meanwhile,
13?
yep, meanwhile being groomed by his father, who's 80 years old, constantly molesting me, sticking his fingers inside of me while we're going to the flea market, buying me Daisy Dukes, all these promiscuous clothes. Um, I was 13 the very first time that I was called a lot lizard.
A lot lizard?
Because, yeah, a lot lizard.
Now, what is
And
that?
basically,
Is that like a term
yeah,
down there?
yeah, it's no, it's a term for people that are in truck stops that are prostitutes and
Okay.
escorts.
Okay.
So they call them lot lizards.
Okay.
Basically, I was considered a lot lizard every truck stop that we'd stop at. And pretty much because of the fact that he was a truck driver, it went through a lot of processes where the police actually ended up showing up, and he would tell them, "Oh no, it's just a mistake. She likes to dress like an adult." And the police would start telling him, please be more careful about what she's doing because people are worried and they think that she's being involved in sex trafficking. And lo and behold, that was what was going on. Um, and basically,
Was he getting paid for these guys to?
I don't know.
Okay.
I like honestly don't know because I think that he thought of me like a possession.
Mhm.
But they would sit there and they had a video of me, and my mother ended up coming down to Florida, and this is how I ended up getting saved from sex trafficking. My mother ended up coming down to Florida and seeing a video that was recorded. It was a video of me being passed out on the couch with multiple men and women taking turns raping and molesting me. Uh, Basically, he made me become a wife by the time I was 13. I got to be a normal kid for an hour after school, and then I'd have to come back. And if I was late or anything, I would get the shit kicked out of me. And then my mother went down, and because this guy's my mother's age, my mother ended up sleeping with him. Well, lo and behold, how am I supposed to respond? My mom gave me up, doesn't want anything to do with me. And then she's going to come down and sleep with my quote unquote husband. Not going to happen. So we went back up to Pennsylvania to drop her off. And he ended up dropping me off, telling me that he was going to go visit somebody at one of his friends and that he'd be back to pick me up. He wanted to give me a little bit of extra time to say goodbye to my mom. Lo and behold, he went to his friend's house and he took my stepdad's daughter, his biological daughter, who I considered my half sister all my life. He took her down to Florida. And I don't know whether she ended up going through the same thing that I went through, but pretty much I was left high and dry. So the result was that my mom, once again, sent me to live with my stepdad's brother. Um, there's situations on that I still haven't addressed that, went on there. In some twisted, warped kind of sense. Hold on a second. Uh,
Take your time.
he thought that I was supposed to be his wife because he was in love with my mom, and basically told me that it would be okay if me and him would end up getting married or ended up becoming a couple. So basically, this is the type of men that I have in my life that are supposed to be my role models.
Yeah.
So obviously, whenever I stare and I think about it, and a lot of people start to say, well, about the prostitution and the escorting and all that stuff that you got into later on in life. Well, checkmate. Bitch, have you not heard what I just told you? Okay. You tell me in what aspect, in what way, shape, or form I'm supposed to sit there and think that anything about people touching me is normal.
Yeah.
You know, People are like, why do you flinch whenever somebody goes near you to give you a hug? What the fuck is a hug? Wasn't I love you? And that's really the reason why I started Renegades. And we're going to get into that later on. But this is a lot of the situations that resulted in me remaining quiet. And then I come to find out that there's other people going through the same stuff that was a result of my family, and it was a product of me being around them. I basically was used as bait for the individuals that were, devious with sexual, gratification problems. They would take the people that I was hanging out with in my neighborhood and they would do bad stuff to them. I mean, like, my one neighbor, they ended up having to move away because of how serious it was. His dad found out that one of my relatives had put Bengay on his private parts and then was making them watch porn and experiment with each other and stuff like that. Whenever this guy found out about what was going on with my relative, he literally tried setting my relative's house on fire. Um, then my dad never did anything wrong to me. I love my dad. My dad and me have a very different, awkward relationship. Um, but basically, after I left, he completely cut me off. Like, wanted nothing to do with me. You know what I mean? And that really bothered me because now here I am. I'm 13 years old. I have nowhere to go. No one wants me. No one loves me. My own parents don't want nothing to do with me. You know? So basically, my mom called CPS and they put me into the YMCA emergency youth shelter in Greensburg. Um, I was so destroyed. I felt like I wanted to run away. I wanted to hide, and I had no clue what to do. Um, Basically, I saw two other girls that decided that they were going to bolt and were going to run away together. And I figured that I would go with them because maybe then I'd have a chance. Maybe I'd find somebody that wanted me. Maybe I'd find a family that would adopt me or take me. And, somebody would finally care enough to make me feel better about who I was. Um, I got about a block away, had a panic attack and an asthma attack, and I was hiding underneath a car. I'll never forget crawling up from underneath the car, walking up to the staff worker that was trying to find the other girls and saying, should I just go walk back up and ring the doorbell? I don't understand why I even left. I have no place to go. Where am I running to? What am I running from? Um, so my mom, you know, tried to make it seem like she was a caring mother because she didn't want to get in trouble. And they told her with some parenting classes that she would be able to, get me to come home. Well, in the juvenile court system, placement hearings are generally every 6 to 9 months to a year. Okay, you can have the 3 to 6 months, but it's very, special circumstances. My mom was supposed to do 6-hour classes once a week for 6 weeks on a Wednesday from 5 to 6 in order to get me to come home. My mom couldn't even bother herself to do that. Um, so I ended up being interviewed by, you know, group homes instead of foster care because of me running away and because of everything that my mom had told them that I was this evil monster and I was completely out of control. She told them that she was afraid that I was going to end up getting pregnant and, you know, and all this stuff. And my mom didn't even know who I was. And basically, I got punished. And literally, no matter what I told these people, they didn't believe me. They thought that I was lying. Because, it's like addiction. Even when you're a kid, you're automatically trying to place the blame on everybody else. You don't take accountability for yourself. So, with me being raised up like that, I've always learned that I'm the one to blame. I'm at fault. I'm the cause, I'm the problem, and I'm the solution. Um, I was given one privilege growing up, and that was to go to public school. Um, what kind of privilege is it to stare and be able to go around normal people and normal kids who have normal families that don't have to go back to a house where you're locked in, where you have to sit down and confront each other about everything. You have to accept everybody else's criticism. You have to problem solve. All you do is sit there and sit in meetings. People talk about rehab. Okay, the juvenile system is worse than rehab. All right. And the reason why I say that is, don't get me wrong, I've never been to rehab. However, with the same principles and the same circumstances that go around, you see all of the stuff that goes on within the the rehabs. They don't touch the surface of the problems. I can sit here and I can tell you until I'm blue in the face all of my flaws and everything that I'm insecure about. But whenever it comes to sitting there and being able to take action and responsibility for it, I felt completely worthless all of my life. I felt like I was unworthy of a change and I was unworthy of success. So I spent the next several years being bounced and forth in between group homes and foster homes.
Were you doing
And
drugs and drinking at this point?
no,
No. Okay.
I I was locked up. I had no access. By ninth grade, like I knew what acid was. Okay, and that was basically because I was a hustler, and I'm not gonna lie, I was a geek. So I would literally tell people, "Hell, I'll do your book reports for you. If you want an A, you get me 2 packs of cigarettes. You want a B, you give me $5. You want a C, give me some candy." And me being in the group home, I had to hustle. You know what I mean? I didn't have family. I didn't have snacks. I didn't have privileges.
Yeah.
So one kid sat there and offered me a carton of cigarettes every 2 weeks if I let him keep his acid in my locker. So I was a big baller, growing up. The only reason why, like, I felt lucky growing up was because of the fact that I was in the same school district where my family was. But that was also the hardest part about growing up. Because how do you explain to the girls that live in the house that your mom lives right down the road, and yet they never met your mom and they never see her?
Yeah.
You know?
It's not like your mom's have PTO meetings and shit.
Yeah, yeah. Like, are you kidding? My mom
On your
didn't even
school
make my.
chaperoning your school trips and everything.
Yeah, exactly. Fuck that. Chaperone what? My mom was. I always suspected that there was something wrong with my mom, like she was on something. And whenever I was at home not too long ago, a few years ago, I literally got confirmation that my mom was really big into powder. So, that's a lot of the explanations on how she was so blind to all the abuse that was going on and, being so
You
unaware.
mean cocaine,
Yeah, yeah,
which was huge in
she
the
was.
80s. Which was huge in
Yeah,
the 80s. Yeah.
oh, yeah. And especially because of the fact that, Bakers, the pagans and the Hells Angels and everything, they live up in PA.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody's a part of. And that's a big reason why it's uncommon for people from my area to speak out and have enough courage to stand tall and basically go against the grain and talk about what goes on within my family. It's not towards any type of hatred or resentment or blame towards them. It's just a concept to let everybody know that when somebody tells you, shh, don't talk about it, be seen and not heard, that's bullshit. The reason why so many people go undiagnosed and everything is based on this silence. You know,
Yeah.
I didn't even mention the several life, threatening situations that I put myself in to try to die within the time that I was in group home, was in the foster care. I mean,
Like
every
what's
time
one
I get to,
example?
I took all of my antidepressants and everything that they had me on because I was institutionalized for the first time when I was 13. And that was because my roommate at the group home was molesting me. She would sit on me, she would fart on me, and they were really, really bullying me. I was the smallest girl. They would take me in a closet, she'd beat the shit out of me. And I went through a lot. And literally, our room, the staff desk was right here, and my room was catty corner to the staff desk. And she was still able to get away with this shit. So I had to go to the doctor because I was having stomach problems because, I was very bulimic and anorexic. I felt like I was fat. I have thyroid problems. And I'd constantly, bloat and all that stuff. And I'd feel like it was my fault. So I'd be very picky with what I ate and all that stuff because I didn't want to get chubby.
Hmm.
However, I had such a low self esteem by this point, I refused to wear jeans. I would wear straight sweatpants, sweatsuits, and that was my groove. That was my style. Baggy clothes was it for me because I ended up being on the internet on file sharing as a child porn star. And if people start to tell you, oh, you're a drug addict, you chose that life. You're right. I chose that life to get through my life. Was it the right answer? No, not at all.
Yeah, and your brain's not fully developed at that point to actually make that kind of. You shouldn't have to make that kind of decision, and you're not responsible for making that kind of decision at that age.
No. And then coming from a small town to go to a big city, here's where the kicker comes into play. I ended up aging out of the system. Needless to say, my mother never, gave two shits about getting me out. Um, I got put into a program called supervised apartment living. And basically, it was a program where I was given the opportunity to have my own apartment. I've been locked up for 6 years. You're going to give me freedom and then have regulations against it? Come on now. A caged bird is going to stare and fly crazy. So they threatened for Thanksgiving to make me go to a foster home instead of allowing me to stay with my grandparents. And I was 19 at the time. I was supposed to graduate from high school and go to the army, but I didn't pass the psychological evaluation.
I wonder why.
So I know, right? Not saying that I'm a little bit crazy or anything, but basically it was a lot to absorb, you know. And I just decided that I was going to try to do for my own. Um, I had no job. Luckily enough, one of my uncles had passed away. So I had family that was in from Maryland. And my cousin that I was really close to growing up gave me a safety. They offered to let me come down here to go to school and graduate. I could find a job, and they would let me stay there and, help me learn how to be a normal person. That lasted about 3 days. My aunt started giving me all kinds of grief and everything. And my aunt was an alcoholic, and my aunt would constantly make assumptions saying that she knew what I was all about and all this and all that. So here I am once again, alone, abandoned, no family. I didn't know anyone. I ended up meeting a guy from El Salvador through my cousin's boyfriend.
This ends up being
He,
your first husband.
yep, this sends up my first and only husband. We're still married currently, unfortunately. He doesn't seem to be too interested in getting a divorce, which, hey, and if I die tomorrow, he gains one thing from me. You know what that is? My financial debt, and I can't wait. He's not going to get a good credit score. Bitch should have divorced me when you had the chance. um, that was very unique. Uh,
How much
going
older is
from
he?
he was actually only 3 years older.
Okay.
Yeah, he was 22. I was 19. And the funny part was, okay, Spanish life. Here we go. This was the greatest. Uh, Human trafficking. Okay. My husband came over here via a coyote, right? And the coyote happened to be my brother in law's wife's brother. And he was literally the one, whenever you heard about the people in Texas that was found in the back of that tractor trailer
Yeah.
that it was dead, that was his situation,
Yep.
supposedly. But it was very awkward. He didn't speak any English. I never had a relationship. I was in foster care. How the hell am I going to date? And not to mention, my idea of dating is hand jobs, blow jobs, or giving up ass. I mean, I'm sorry, that's the only thing that I was ever taught that I was worth.
Yeah.
Um, it didn't make a lot of sense for me to sit there and try to find another person. And I just decided, hey, you need a green card. I need a family. It's a win-win.
Yeah.
Um, I ended up becoming so consumed that I learned a whole language. You know, uh, Basically tried to be the best wife that I could be, and then I ended up getting pregnant. Well, basically, the difference between Spanish people and American people. We are very reserved. We'd like to have our own houses, and we don't want anybody all up in our business. With Spanish families, you always live with the family. You always got to send money home, et cetera, et cetera. And there's like 13 people living in a two-bedroom apartment. And it's like my daughter, I can tell you exactly where my daughter was conceived. My daughter was conceived on the living room floor. And I'm almost positive that my nephews ended up catching us. Like that's just the scenario. Like nobody wants to live with that. So basically, I tried to sit there and I tried to teach him how to better himself, and adapt to the United States way. I mean, the whole traditional situation wouldn't work being over here, especially starting a family over here. You got a white wife. You pretty much need to start learning how to speak English. Don't rely on everybody else. Put your foot forward. You're not dumb. You can do these things. You don't need to rely on anybody. You need to be independent. Well, he never liked that idea. Um, he currently lives with his girlfriend's parents in their basement. I mean, this is just exactly, the type of situation that you got going on within these Spanish families. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but I'm not saying that there's anything right about it either. You know what I mean? You've got to start. You've got to start come to a conclusion where you've got to make a divide. And my husband didn't want to make that division. Whenever I was 21, we were already having minor problems, with fighting back and forth. And I was pregnant with my daughter, Kira. Uh, Basically, he and I developed such a hatred for each other that he would just not talk to me. And I thought that automatically the only way to get him to be satisfied was to be what? Do your wifely duties. He ended up telling me all the time that he didn't want my daughter, and that it was a bad decision, that he wishes that we weren't around and all that stuff. And I know these things were said out of anger and hatred. However, when you sit there and you say something to somebody, I don't give a fuck how many times you apologize. Somewhere you felt that. That's why I'm very careful with what I say to people, and I'm very careful with the way I phrase shit, because I mean what I say and I say what I mean. The only thing that I have is my word, and I hold myself to a higher court than most people. Like, I I ended up leaving my husband over the fact that his father was trying to get me to have sex with him. He would constantly tell me that he was better for me than my husband, and that a lot of things would go into play where we would end up, discussing in depth how inappropriate his father was, and he would just ignore me. And I told him I wasn't comfortable with his father being around me. He came home one day. I had a knife up to his dad. You know, uh, I wasn't playing. I told him if he touched me again or acted inappropriately, I was going to show him what crazy white girl meant and translate it very loosely for him. And I told him that I didn't care what was going on in his country. You don't fuck around like that here, especially with me. You know, my husband did not understand the situation, clocks me in the nose, black and blues both my eyes. I pick up a cast iron skillet and I start beating him with it. My daughter comes into the doorway, and automatically I stop and I begin to cry. And
How old was
I'll tell
she?
you, she was 1.5.
Okay.
Um, that was probably the most terrifying day of my life, because I looked at my daughter and I started to cry, realizing that instead of shattering the stigma and breaking the chains of what was going to go on with my mom and me and being a good mom, that I was in a position where I was going to fail my kids. And then that made me completely lose my mind. I completely felt so worthless and so unworthy. And I'm not even going to start and say that the reason why me and my husband split was because of the fact that he was a bad person, because my husband really wasn't a bad person. He was very quiet, he tried to be patient. Um, Unfortunately, with the cultural difference and everything, and my trauma that I hadn't dealt with, I ended up doing the same thing that my mom did. When I left my husband, I became an exotic dancer. I started tripping. Before that, when I was still with my husband, I was working as a carnival worker. And literally, I went to Pennsylvania to follow the carnival worker and was sleeping with him when I'm 8 months pregnant. Okay. I leave my husband at 8 months pregnant with a toddler on a bus to go to my mom's house to drop off my daughter. So let her stay there. Then go to Philadelphia on another bus, find out that I was not really supposed to follow that clown with him. And he basically had moved on to another person. So I pretty much went out to Philly for no reason. But I got back to my mom's house, and my mom basically had called my husband and told my husband he needed to come up and pick me and Haley up. And my mom gave me a deadline to go home. Instead of my mom being supportive and telling me, hey, look, let's get you out of the situation. It's domestic violence. He could hurt you. My daughter was the only thing that my mom cared about. She didn't want me to leave my husband who was beating me. Uh, Yet she didn't want to help me get away from it. And the only thing that she did was gravitated towards how I was affecting Haley. And that I was a selfish bitch because I didn't think about the kids.
Now, was your daughter your mom's second chance to be a mom?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah, because of the fact that literally the only time that my mom started to try to have a relationship with me was whenever I was married. I had my daughter on the way.
Yeah. Yep.
Literally, whenever my mom and me exchanged any type of words for the last time was whenever I was 19, and I ended up having to go up to Pennsylvania to get my birth certificate and my social security card. And my mother had no interest in meeting my husband or my husband's family or anything. And literally, when we got up there, we weren't welcome anywhere. Like, literally, that's how, black sheep I am with my family. It makes it very difficult and un, unruly to try to think about having some type of normal family life. Like, I feared my children. And the reason why I feared my children was because of the fact that I thought that if I was such a bomb, what was I bringing these innocent things into the world for? And then whenever I finally had my second daughter, I got sick and had a staph infection, and I had, pretty much postpartum syndrome and just dealing with everything. Because by this time, 2001 had already happened. My husband was working in the Pentagon the day of the attack, uh, just all of that. And I ended up getting a phone call also that same day asking me if I would be willing to testify against the person that sex trafficked me when I was 12, even though I wouldn't get any type of result as you know, as a reward
Yeah, I was
for
gonna say this
saying,
isn't motivated by you. You weren't going to. This wasn't for your justice. This was for somebody else's
yeah,
character
it was
witness.
pretty
Okay.
much, yeah, to provide a defamation to his character
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
his custody hearing.
Yep.
And I'm like, you know what? You guys weren't interested in the story before, so why are you going to be interested in the story now? I've, gotten past that. I'm a mother now. I can't do that. I can't open myself up to those wounds for somebody else when my children need me to be seen. Lo and behold, my biggest fear was losing my kids and having them, be misplaced like me. I did one hell of a job on fucking that all the way up for each one of these kids. Uh, Kira, basically, she went to stay with my sister in law a week after I had her. And me and Joel were already having all these problems, and he was still beating me. And then my sister in law decided that it was in Kira's best interest to stay there. And at this point, Who am I to stand and claim any different? You know, why am I going to argue? They're better off without you. Everybody's better off without you, Amanda. Once again, the PTSD, the whole I don't belong here. So this is when the drug phases started. I wanted to die, and I knew that drugs was the way to go.
Yeah.
Okay. Whenever I start and I say to people that my addiction was my choice, my addiction was my choice because of the fact that my addiction was I was chasing the end. I wasn't using the drugs to stare and get through anything to mask the pain or anything. I was using basically to blow my fucking heart up. I was not joking around. I had friends whenever I had drugs. They weren't my friends, but guess what? They were around. And then whenever the drugs were gone, the people were gone. So basically, I started just acting like them. Hit after hit after hit after hit after hit after hit after hit. And it made it as an excuse. You can't leave the house if you're all fucked up. And every time that I would leave the house, because by this time I had left my husband and was staying in a house that was a crack house, basically. Uh, there was this guy that was at the strip club, was an older gentleman that basically became my sugar daddy. He was such an amazing person, and I literally saw him for who he was and how people took advantage of him. Um, he was so caring and giving, and he didn't care about material things. Like literally, this guy bought me a limo. He bought me anything that I wanted, and I'm not a materialistic person. You know what I mean? I want more than that. The things that money can't buy is what I want. I want general compassion. I want, sincerity, the loyalty, and all that. Which basically, he started treating me like I was a common street whore. And so basically, I started acting like it. You know, you met me in the club. You think that I act like this, this promiscuous person. Well, here you go. And literally, we'd get into all kinds of fights because he would have his ex-wife stay at our house, and she was on heroin. And that was one thing. Okay, like here I am, the hypocrite. Okay, the whole saying, well, at least I'm not a heroin addict, right? I had that mentality. You would stare, you'd have oxycodones, you'd have, Percocets, everything under the sun in my house, except I had a problem with heroin. All right, you're stupid.
I used to say the same thing though, Mandie. I used to, I would do all the the Roxy 30s
Mm,
and the OC 80s, the Oxycontin, and I would. It's the lies we tell ourselves, and it's
exactly,
like
it's the same but through.
I remember early on into my addiction, I started using opiates, the pills in 2008, in October 2008, and around like Christmas time, January, Christmas time, a good friend of mine, he's just a pothead still to this day. 20 years later, he's still just a pothead. And he had his wisdom teeth taken out, and he was given perk fives. And I got to his house. We were watching. He's really into music, so am I. And we like to smoke a joint and watch music concerts on DVD. That was our thing. So I get to his house. He got a new one. I think it was Billy Joel, if I'm not mistaken. And so we get there, and before I walk into his house, I do like 120 milligrams worth of oxy, like 430s, and I snorted it, and because I was a drug addict. And
Yeah.
I get in there, and he takes 1 5 milligram oxy, Percocet, not even oxy, Percocet, filled with Tylenol filler. And
Yep.
dude is on his ass, asleep, it knocks him out. And I'm sitting there smoking a cigarette, like, all right. I have one of those conversations with myself that I remember still to this day. And I remember going, like, I'm a drug addict then. I have a
Yeah.
problem. If this person who can outsmoke me and outdrink me, he's a high tolerance for stuff, if he can only take 5 milligrams of a Percocet, and I can do 120 milligrams of straight oxy and still be wide awake, and he's passed out cold on a 5, maybe I'm taking this a little too far. And then
Yeah.
instead of saying to myself, I got to stop, like,
Uh,
and most normal people would be like, I got to stop these shenanigans. Instead, I said, I got to make rules.
exactly. I gotta limit my stuff. I only party on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Rule number one: no shooting and no heroin.
There you go.
You know what I mean?
Uh,
And those were the rules. And by sticking to those rules, I stayed in my opiate addiction for a decade. Because I followed my own rules.
yeah.
I always had decent jobs. I bounced around a little bit. But I was a functioning drug addict that always held down jobs and
Hmm.
could always afford. And if I didn't have a job for a little while, I was very good at hustling and selling drugs.
Yep.
Like I'm active in NA. And in part of one of our readings, it says we find ways and means to get more.
Hmm.
And that's how I was. I would always find ways and means to get more, no matter what. It wasn't
Exactly.
running out of money wasn't going to stop me from getting high.
Mm-mm. Exactly.
I was going to find John, Paul, and Peter who needed to get high and had
Yep.
money, and then they were
Yep.
going to pay me extra to
Yep.
go get their pills, and then
Hmm.
I was going to get free pills out of
Yep.
getting them their pills.
Yep.
I didn't even charge
Exactly.
them money.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like, it was the hustle.
Yep.
And
It's the taxation without representation.
and then you get addicted to the hustle because you're like, I don't got to work 8 hours and I got high today.
Exactly, exactly. And it's like this, okay. And that's the number one problem whenever you get in recovery. You sit back and look at how easy money came and went. And now when you're starting to start working normal 9 to 5 and you see how hard it is to get through, you're like, holy fuck, why am I even trying to work a 9 to 5? Let me sit there and hit the straight corner again, see what I can work with. But then I realized something. See, my prostitution days were very short lived because I talk too much. I have attention deficit disorder. And pretty much, if you're not done in 30 seconds, I'm pretty much not interested. And I'm sitting there whistling and singing Dixie. Yeah, I might ruin the mood a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah, so
I'm
basically,
not
I
paying you to talk.
became I know, right? And I would stare. I'd like, are you finished yet? You realize that we have a time limit, right? We're past this time limit. You've got about 30 seconds before I kick you, and you're not going to be able to do anything for a while. Okay, yeah. And basically, I got a lot of complaints. On the hustle was so real before the internet. Like, I envy the Craigslist ads because we literally would have to stare and get on like the 202 chat lines, you know, and we'd have to record this sexy message and then wait for like 13 people to call you back, and then you'd stare and pick and choose which Johns you wanted to accept that evening. And 98% of the time, these people were just, not correct. But they came to party, and guess what? Um, I was too busy trying to analyze everybody and tell them that they were better than what they were giving themselves credit for. Yeah. Uh,
See, there's another thing too. Is you kind of reminded me a second ago. When you said about the 9 to 5 hustle once you get clean. It reminds me there people and you're active online, in recovery groups and shit. That's how we met. Um,
Hmm.
and I see people will post, like how much money would I have today, if I didn't do drugs? And
Exactly.
the answer though is still just as much money as you have. And the reason
Exactly.
is you wouldn't have been motivated to make that money illegally. Like most of the money I made to support my habit is not a way that I would do. I wouldn't be doing scams to rip people off clean and
Yep.
sober
On a day-to-day basis.
on a
Exactly.
day-to-day basis to support myself. I wouldn't the
Hmm.
desperation to make money. I was very desperate to make $200 to $300 a day for a long time.
Oh,
And
exactly. And see, and I'm glad that you sat there and mentioned that, because this is what I give so many props to you and to people in the recovery community that are like you. Like, I'm going to mention names. I'm going to mention Drew Hicks, Jamie Etheridge, Nikki Poudre, Bisley, Patrick Ridge, and Graceland, and all them. All of these people out here are doing amazing things. And the crazy part is, you have such a pink cloud in the recovery community. It's constantly a traumatic situation, because you get into the fact when a big portion of your healing is sharing your testimony, and being able to overcome it. You don't share it on repeat to consistently dwell on the past. You share it once and then you move on. And it's not like you have to sit there and do an update, but it's easier when you do an update, because I've learned that the story that I'm telling right now and getting in depth with it, more things become aware over time. And people automatically are like, wait a minute, mm, I don't remember this from the original story. It's the perception. It's based on the environment of the interview. It's based on a lot of things, and it
a
depends
lot of
on which
times you don't remember it either.
No, exactly. Like, I have alters, like right now. It's self that's in control, and you'll see, because you're gonna get to witness Leah, and you'll get to notice the shift change, because you've saw it before.
I was gonna say I
Um,
met Leah.
yeah, Leah is the more outgoing, and self is confident, but she gets really nervous. And then, like, whenever my voice starts shaking, and that means that we're getting into a situation where Leah had to take control. So you know how it goes. Basically, I've got to take a little breath, and I guess she's ready
And
to
I,
talk.
I can go for a second too. And you were talking about sharing, and I share very often. I share in meetings every day. 5 minute shares. And it's not always my story. It's about checking in with how I'm doing in that specific moment, or maybe like let's see today. Um, Today is Sunday the 20th. This episode will be out in a while, but still. Today's daily reading in NA is Forgiveness Sets Us Free. And, in my meeting tonight, we'll talk about Forgiveness Sets Us Free. And we'll read this long paragraph, these paragraphs, and then we'll share on it. So the last paragraph is, who in my life have I forgiven, or at least started to? And what has that been like? How might my life be different if I continue down this path? And in that, we would be able to talk about who we've forgiven and why, people that we don't think we would ever forgive, and be able to kind of, you know, find a way to move on from our past. So, my reading today is going to be different than what the reading was yesterday, and so on and so forth. And that's why, I like to share every day, because I'm feeling something different every day. And sometimes, like last Saturday, I hosted the meeting, and I decided the topic was going to be insanity. And everyone share on how your disease and how you portrayed insanity in your disease of addiction. And so then we all did 5 minutes, not all of us, but 10 of us did 5 minutes on insanity. And really good meeting. But so I find it important to open yourself up as much as you can and talk. And I do therapy, so I talk in therapy. I do couples therapy, so I talk in that therapy. I do, I find way, and then I do these podcasts again, and I do 2 of these podcasts, and I might tell you a story that I told somebody else and somebody else. And it's not to harp on something. It's to give, maybe there's somebody watching this episode with you and I that hasn't seen that episode before that I told that story.
Exactly. And I'm glad that you touched in on that, by the way. Hi, it's nice to see you again. Thanks for having us.
Always a pleasure.
It's definitely very interesting always coming on your platform. And the reason why I began laughing so much is because we didn't even orchestrate this. But I want you to read what I decided to start as of today because of a captivation of, this coming forward to discuss a trauma. As a tribute to my friend JD Dukes, I would be doing the feed this morning on the unlicensed therapist. 42. Is forgiving yourself necessary to move forward in the recovery process? If so, why? This is a part of a trivia game called Overcome. It's based on questions to help us on a recovery journey. We can forgive, but we are unable to forget. It's a common stigma within recovery. We often think that life is so devastating that we harbor the judgment and the guilt affiliated by others. So it's hard to give ourselves a little credit for the small things. If you're constantly overwhelmed, then you're going to spend life on a roller coaster ride that's fatal. I know I spend a majority of time reminding myself that no one's perfect, and sometimes we do certain things out of necessity to survive. And there's nothing to hold yourself in internal conflict, since there's nothing to do to remove the situation. We live one day at a time, right? This is a cliche, to be honest, because sometimes you need to think about it next week and plan accordingly to have something to look forward to. Instead of allowing the world to pass you by, think about how precious our time is and how hard it is to find a world to fit in. The common denominator within is finding the courage to move forward and manifest brighter things yet to come. Um, as a result of Amanda's past and all of her abuse, I had to become a very big part of her life. Basically, every time that she was being raped or being beaten or would have to start and go somewhere else, I would come forward and I would shelter her from these things.
Yeah.
Like she said, that there is several of us that are, involved. And it used to be to a point where she couldn't control us. And with having dissociative identity disorder, a lot of people don't understand what this is a result of. So I guess this is where I wanted to come in to explain to people. With hearing about Amanda's past from the time that she was 0 to 6 years old, these are the most critical times for a child to be nurtured and to basically develop.
Yeah, that's why you want to teach kids 0 to 6 different languages so that they grasp
Exactly.
the new languages easier because their brain is picking up on it. Yeah.
Exactly. And with me, with my dissociative identity disorder, it's hard for other people looking on the outside to understand. And as an adult, it's harder for me to become in social situations because I have a lot of aggression issues. I'm the enforcer of the situation. When somebody comes at Amanda, you deal with me. I am the executioner, the punisher, everything. Um, I used to sit there and have idealizations of being a weapon and using sex as a weapon. And this is a problem that a lot of people don't understand. Being in the stripping industry and all that, I was a predator looking for prey. I could sit there and manipulate every situation into whatever I wanted because all of the people were there for a fantasy. I was able to provide that fantasy.
Yeah.
And it was a comfort zone because instead of me looking at what I was doing, and this goes to show you the extent of the trauma, most people, instead of taking off their shorts before they take off their top, when they're sitting there doing their first, debut as a dancer, that goes to show you the lack of confidence and the self esteem issues. And it was like, whenever I first got up on that stage, I didn't feel beautiful. I didn't feel, comfortable or anything. But I loved to dance. And everybody told me, it was about the dancing, that people appreciated your dancing. And then I watched and saw all of the different things that go on inside of the club with the escorts, the trafficking there, all the girls having pimps, and literally I ended up out of naiveness getting involved in a situation where I had a pimp. And he, you you're supposed to give people respect, right? When you're talking to somebody, you generally give them eye contact and you let them know that you're paying attention. For people that don't know uh, the true definition, me looking and giving eye contact to the guy that I gave eye contact to, he automatically owned me. And it wasn't because I was showing him respect and I was paying attention to what he said. I disrespected him by looking him straight in the eyes. As a bitch, I had no room to sit there and do anything other than this. No direct eye contact with anybody or anything. Needless to say, I was lucky that I escaped that life because I was rebellious and they found a alternative way for me. Me being raped by women and men pretty much opened a theory. Women were more gentle. They weren't going to hurt me. So basically, I would sit there and I would hook up with, other chicks and stare and put on shows and everything. And then I ended up doing the one thing that I never thought that I would possibly do within my addiction. I looked at it rationally, selling my friends to people that I was sleeping with, thinking that I'm helping them out. Instead of realizing that I was just pimping them out and I wasn't any better than the people that did that to me all of my life.
Yeah.
So once again, here I am feeling the guilt, the resentment. Here I am fucking up because of life, of drugs. Um, there's no option to go in anywhere other than down. So I would stay awake for 7 days, at a time. Um, I ended up meeting friends online and I went to Rhode Island. I was dating a guy on the internet from Yahoo and ended up, you know, getting high up there, smoking crack, snorting coke, smoking weed, doing everything under the sun, drinking, was having a great old time. I ended up coming back and My husband and me ended up meeting in the park, and I was drunk, and my husband took advantage of the situation, and we slept together. During that time, I ended up becoming pregnant with my son, my oldest son. He is 22 years old, and basically, the situation with that, once again, Amanda had told you about Kira being removed. Clayton went through a similar situation. And basically, Amanda tried to get herself clean during this time when she was pregnant with Clayton because she knew that this was her opportunity. She didn't have anybody to answer to. This was God's way of giving her something to love her unconditionally. And this is the answer to everything. So my son was born, and after he was born, um, I ended up going and getting into a DUI, and as a result, I had to go to jail for a week. Um, I asked my mother to help me out and keep an eye on my son for me. And because the fact that my mom was already angry that I left my husband, blah, 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 and we had already, basically gotten back to the same situation it was whenever I was 13 when she abandoned me the first time. Um, and my mom pretty much hit me in front of my kids. I held her up against the wall and I told her, I said, don't ever touch me again. If you do, I will kill you. I have too many years of built up frustration and anger and resentment towards the things that happened between us. I don't want to stare and have you get hurt as a result of this. Please don't ever put your hands on me again. My mother told my family that I was high, completely out of control, that I threatened to kill her, and that I had a gun and I had a weapon, and that she needed them to, come rescue her. Uh, Needless to say, I left, and my children stayed at my mother's house. My mother then called my husband and had him come pick up my daughter, and she kept my son. Um, Now, she still had contact with my daughter, but here you go. You got my son, who is now her second chance at being mom.
Yeah.
Not only being, super nana, but being mom. She raised him without letting me talk to him, see him, or anything. And basically, when she got sick, he was 12 years old at the time. And uh, she had me go up and tell him uh, my life story and how she put me away because I was bad. And I ended up having to go up and look at my son and tell him that, everything that I did. And that's what ended up happening with me with my story. I was very resentful and angry because I kept on getting all kinds of allegations and accusations of how my lifestyle was lived. So I decided to write down, an expose on exactly how bad that I screwed up in my life and the decisions that I was responsible for. But the decisions that I'm responsible for as an adult began at a very critical age. People say that ignorance is not an excuse. Ignorance isn't an excuse. But there's also a thing where if you see something, say something.
Yeah.
Nobody knew what I was going through as a kid. They seen it, but they kept quiet about it and swept it under the rug. I now look back at all that, and it brings me to who I am today. You know, um, we spent all this time talking about the trauma, So now I want to get into the recovery
Healing.
aspect.
Yeah, the
Yes, the
healing. Yeah.
healing. Um, Basically, after undergoing all of the different things that I went through in my life, it became a part of a process where I needed to chase something. And as addicts, you're never going to not be an addict. Unfortunately, you gravitated towards something else. It's not a bad thing. The only difference is instead of using the addiction that you chased as a negative, chase a different high, manifest a different beginning and outcome. Uh, I never pictured that I would be able to stand in front of the Washington Monument and sing in front of thousands of people and discuss my story about how we overcome and we become resilient. I started Manders Renegades, which is basically an advocate for everything. I go hard for anti-bullying, with the cyberbullying, because within the recovery community, uh, my belief is harm reduction. I believe that whatever it takes, if you want to start and you need a Suboxone, you take it.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to sit there and tell you, oh, no, 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 you're not clean and you're not in recovery because you have to sit there and you have to, sugarcoat it. Um, I use medicinal. Like I said, there's several people that live inside of my body. It's not easy to have different pills and different regimens. And a lot of people have always told me that I was a hypocrite because of the fact that I was still, smoking marijuana and the absence of smoking crack. I have this to say to them. Within the regulation and the consumption of the marijuana that I use and everything, it's not on a let's take it and let's just, get fucked up type situation.
Yeah.
It's very regulated. As you noticed, the last time that I was on your show, I had to hit my vape several times during it, and we, kept it nonchalant. But this time, as you can see, it's more of a fact that it's not necessary. It's more for whenever the chest pains and the anxiety and everything starts talking. And Mandie wants to say something, so transitioning, as you can tell, I'm getting lower and lower. Uh, as a result of everything that you go through, you know, it's hard to share your story, especially with having so many different people that want to talk at one time. You notice that was the problem that we had getting through the last time. Uh, but whenever the altars get to play, that comes from the mask movement because we all have our own identities. But there's so many of us that's wrapped up in one thing. So when people stare and they start to judge me from the outside and trying to understand what's going on, you don't know what a person goes through until you walk a mile in their shoes. I'm 45 years old. I still have recurring nightmares where I beat myself in my sleep to the point where I wet the bed. I've never had one moment of normalcy. And have I ever felt like I've ever been involved or welcome in anywhere? I've always felt like an outcast and like a shadow. And then going and starting to, use my disability. to my advantage. I started ghostwriting a long time ago in the recovery community.
Yeah.
And it was a way for everybody to be able to start and say whatever they felt and what they wanted. And I would sing. And that was my altars. What they would do is they go in live feeds during Facebook, and I would be typing up, their thoughts, and we would sing, and it would talk about the recovery process. And I became very popular. I went on the Fuck Heroin Foundation. I don't know if you remember the Radio Recovery FM. It was several years ago. Um, I was on that show twice, and I became a very big part of the Fuck Heroin Foundation. Leah and Frankie are very close friends of mine, and they've always been very supportive. And as a matter of fact, those are probably the two strongest people in my recovery, aside from my best friend Laura, who probably is the only person in my life that I've ever called consistent and has loved me for everything that I am, instead of being a burden to her. And our dysfunctional is completely functional together. And that's why you say it takes a village. I don't like to be a bitch, but I know I am. And the reason why is if I'm out here to make friends, I'm going to die. Because of the fact that nobody sits here and pays attention and says anything until after it's too late. And that's the biggest thing that Renegade stands for. You give a voice to the voiceless. Because for so long, I had no clue what innocence was. My innocence was robbed at me before I was even had a chance to experience it. Believe in yourself. Because nobody else is going to start pick you up, and nobody else is going to make you feel like you're important if you don't realize that you're important. I can finally stand to take a picture of myself. I'm finally able to walk outside in public without my mask on. And I've experienced so many things since I found my recovery. Instead of chasing a man, a false illusion, I now chase education.
Yeah.
Things to stare at and help out other people. I constantly make art and do the best that I can. Like I said, the walk for recovery, that's a very big thing here in the DC area. And it's for dual diagnosis, it's for co-occurring disorders. That's pretty much one of my biggest accomplishments and achievements in life. Um, we're the first national event that's ever been recognized for more than, the physical concept of the addiction industry. And it's like I get to take pride in, meeting different people from the recovery community that travel. I get to be an ambassador. And I'm going to explain to you the difference between being an ambassador and being an advocate for recovery. Um, an ambassador is held to a higher standard. Instead of me, only coming on social media and making lives and discussing my recovery, I literally meet up with senators, with people, of authority. And because of the fact that I live here in the DC area, there are a lot of people that are aware of what I do and how I help out with the recovery community, and that I basically, am a resource for a lot of people to come to ask for advice and ask for help. I've never charged anybody for these things because of the fact that, like you said, recovery is about giving back for free. You know, I took so many things through my addiction. It's not time for me to sit there and be an asshole and find other people and walk down the road and shine a camera on them in the middle of the street while they're laid out. Hey, you're exploiting people when you do that. When you're sitting there, you're having a conversation, and the people are completely coherent and you're in agreement, like what we're doing right here. This is completely different. But when you're sitting there and you're walking through the streets and showing everybody without blurring their faces, without knowing whether they're hiding from someone or what they're doing. Instead, you've got these people that think that it's funny. And then I want to ask you a question, and you're going to love this because we're going to both have the same answer. Now, as addicts, if I want to find an easy scam to make money off the recovery community, what am I going to do?
Well, body brokerage is a huge thing.
Okay. And body brokering also stands for, if you're walking down the street and you're setting up GoFundMe's or asking for donations to give supplies to certain people,
Yeah.
and then instead you come up with situations on how they're giving out water and different stuff like that. Yet they completely say, like, oh, we're not asking for any money, or we don't need any money. We're just out here. 90% of the time when you see an addict that is out here in the streets trying to interview other people in active addiction, they're not good people. They're using your story to make a quick buck. Look at Girls Gone Wild. Intoxicated teenagers showing their titties. Now, all these years later, guess what's happening? Girls Gone Wild has gone even wilder because now the stupid asshole that decided to take advantage of these chicks while they were drunk, he's going to have to pay them a shitload of money and be in debt due to him taking advantage of people when they're not in the right frame of mind to give consent. That's just one thing that really pisses me off. And
Yeah.
another thing that pisses me off is when you sit online and you have people that aren't accountable for the things that they do. Um, you know as well as I do. When you get an idea, everybody else thinks that their idea is better with your premises around it. And they think that they can do a better job at it.
Yeah.
See, me as a content creator, I don't have a problem with that because of the fact that you can't out narrate the narrator. And that's the best part about my DID and discussing everything now. The current update is my 4 children are now 25, 23, 21, and 15. Uh, there's very little contact with them. Um, and that's basically because I don't want to let them down, and I don't want to be let down either. Every time that I try to, establish a certain type of stability, my past track record has pretty much let them down. So I can't expect them to just completely remove everything that they feel to let me in, only to know that I'm sick and that I'm not going to be here for long. There's not like a time limit or anything, but just like every day is a granted thing. You take so much gratitude for being able to wake up and to even be able to breathe. Um, I have two grandchildren now. Um, Mason, who's 5, about to be 6 in August, and Melanie, who just turned 1, June 28th, which is ironically the day after my mom's birthday. Um, my mom passed away in, I think it was 2018. Uh, we ended up making amends before she passed, thankfully.
Good.
Um, Basically, I went up and she actually got to witness somebody from one line that recognized me. And one of the biggest things that I used to do is I would go in my hometown group and just piss people off because of the fact that I was in recovery. And I would tell them, about our war stories. And like they would stare, they would junkie bash really bad. So I'd go on there during doing lives and just be like, yep. So here's the local Clash junkie. How are you guys doing today? And I ended up getting a lot of people to laugh and really have a lot of respect and a lot more knowledge about what it's really like being an addict, and seeing that, that we're not all, pieces of shit that's not going to be able to do anything.
Yeah.
Um, right now, it's like I focus on teaching people throughout the trauma there is a way to see the silver lining, because your scars are a reminder of what you went through. They're not a definition of what's meant to be for who you become.
Yep.
I mean, look at me. I could have ended up being a complete sociopath. Do I have sociopathic tendencies? Probably. Do I have narcissistic tendencies? Don't we all? Like, let's stop with all this labeling shit and let's just realize that it's individual treatment plans, man.
Yeah.
You know, there's too much stigma surrounding healing. And that's when we get our heads out of our asses with that, then that's what's going to be even better for us and our future.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
absolutely
Oh, good. Do you have
you're
any
absolutely
questions
right.
for me?
I was saying you're absolutely right. How can people find Mandie's Renegades? Facebook?
Well, basically, my Facebook is Mandie Singh, Singh.
Yeah.
Now, however, a lot of times your easiest way to find me is through the group Discover and Recover with Nicole. I'm very, big on supporting her platform, and I do a lot of writing and everything in that format. So if you ever need to get a hold of me for anything, if somebody's struggling, my cell phone number is always available, and I'll put it out right now. It's 240-606-4673. You can, always shoot me a messenger request. I'm on TikTok as Manders DC Thunder. Whenever we put out the official video, I'll put up all the links and everything for my social media handles
Yeah,
and the
and if
contacts.
you're watching this and you want to get a hold of Mandie, just reach out to me and I'll connect you.
Mhm.
So
And as you can see, this is another thing. If you don't notice in the orange background right there, where I first got my start for Manders Renegades was from the Drug Addicts Against Drugs, not only drug addicts community. And as an admin, that was my very first platform. And where pretty much Manders started branching off to become the loose cannon that she is. But just
well,
remember,
no,
oh,
no good.
I
No,
was going to say, just remember at the end of the day, your worst obstacles behind you. Like, instead of thinking one day at a time, give yourself a little bit of leadway. Do something out of the norm and make plans for next Tuesday, and then keep true to them. That would be the first start to starting to change your life. And it all begins within yourself. You can't let other people manifest your happiness, because then you're never going to find it.
Yep. Well, Mandie, it is always a pleasure to catch up with you and Leah again. Nice seeing you. And if anyone wants to hear more, reach out to me. I'm sure Mandie will be a guest either on this show or my other MJ show again at some point once we get a chance, or maybe in a couple months, to talk more recovery. And your testimony and your story and your trials and tribulations and everything you've been through, you're not letting it, you're taking control of it by controlling the narrative today and talking about it and not letting it control your thoughts and letting yourself spin out.
Exactly.
And I think that's amazing, and you're doing an amazing job right now. And it's been a pleasure getting to know you more and more, Mandie.
I greatly appreciate it. And we all appreciate all of the things that you do within the recovery community.
Thank you.
And like I said, it's amazing. And for those of you that want to sit and cast stigma or judgment and say that it's too early in his recovery for him to stare and be out there, that's completely wrong and inaccurate, because the easiest way to sit there and help somebody stay on track is by sharing your stories and your struggles and finding a way to know that you always have somebody there to lean your shoulder on. I know that at any given time I can reach out to JD, and he will always respond. And that's the great thing about having your circle. And that's what a renegade is. It's basically a person that doesn't have anybody but can have everybody all at once. You know, it's Ohana's family. Nobody gets left behind. I was left behind all my life. Now I make my own seat at the table.
Yeah. So, well, have a great weekend, and I will be
You
in touch
as
with
well.
you when this is about to come out, so that you're aware.
I greatly appreciate it, JD, and it's always amazing talking to you. And you get some rest.
Uh, I'll be fine. Get some. I'll talk to you soon, Mandie.
All right, take care, JD.
Bye bye.
Bye, everybody.